Hey there, Diagnosing here. Today we're going to continue the theme of steering and have a look at the steering on this Honda and figure out why it's a bit stiff. The way I approach this problem is to isolate the parts of the steering, and that way I can test them all individually and really quickly narrow down where the stiffness is coming from. The way I'm going to do that is take this 14mm nut off the end of the drag link and then separate the drag link from the steering rod here. Now, the steering on this boat is stiff, but it's not immovable. So it's not a seized steering, but it is just quite tight to turn, particularly when it first starts. The other reason I went up to the helm then wasn't just to show you what it's like now. It's also because if you move the steering further this way, quite often it's easier to pull this drag link out. Now that drag link's disconnected, we can see how hard it is to turn the motor, and the answer is not at all. If it was really hard, I'll show you what the problem is. There are nylon bushings in here, and then there are grease nipples on the side that push grease between the bushing and this outer casing of the steering bracket, or the mounting bracket. If that gets filled with old grease, it'll get resistance. If corrosion starts to build up in here, it'll actually pinch on those bearings, it'll compress them and they get really stiff. So if you disconnect your steering and this motor is hard to turn, the stiffness is coming from corrosion or old grease inside this tube here. I've got a video on how to fix that problem. It's not a particularly simple fix, unfortunately. Now that video is on quite a small motor, a little maybe 8 horsepower or something. But the principle is almost identical for all outboards. Outboards are pretty much the same, they're just bigger. There are a few shortcuts to trying to fix that problem. One of them is to try and put a bit of heat on that tube to try and melt old grease. Obviously that's going to have no effect on corrosion, but if somebody heats that tube, somebody else turns the wheel left and right while somebody else pumps grease with a grease gun, it can make a difference. That procedure may not work all the time, but I do think it's worth trying before you disassemble the whole outboard. If it does work, great. If it doesn't, you're going to have to step up to the next procedure, which involves dismantling. Now I'm going to go back up to the helm, turn the wheel again, and see what it feels like now. This steering actually feels pretty smooth once the steering rod's out of the tilt tube quite a bit. So I don't think it's a real problem with the helm, and I don't think it's a problem with the length of the cable, i.e. the cable running through the casing down to the stern of the boat. If that was full of corrosion, I think it'd be quite difficult all the time. What I'm going to do now is undo the collar on the steering cable at the outboard end, and we'll pull that steering rod through and have a look at that. I normally use a shifter on the collar on these steering cables, but this shifter's actually got graduations and it looks like it's saying it's a 28mm. You can hopefully see here, this has got a bit of white corrosion on it, and if I go to undo it, this is turning as well here. What I'm going to do is spray this, try and dissolve a bit of this corrosion, and then get a second spanner that I can put on here so I can break them independently of each other. This is actually just a bit of kerosene, only because I've realised we've run out of WD-40, and this spanner's a 32mm. If I hold this nut here and turn this collar now, the tube inside still spins. So the collar here is corroded onto the inner tube. Before, as that inner tube turned, it was dragging this nut with it. If I hold it still just goes. So now what I'm going to do is put some heat on this collar and see if we can unseize it from the tube. So I'm just heating this collar itself around the outside, trying to get that to expand and break the corrosion that's holding it onto the tube. There we go. It's made a huge difference. It's amazing how much heat will free things up. Unlike the boat we attached the hydraulic steering to, this cable's not coming out very easily, which is a good indication that that is where this stiffness is coming from. inside that tube. So I'm going to use a hammer and just punch it through. You can see here, this old grease here is what we're looking at getting out. Once the steering rod's flush with the tube, you're going to need some sort of drift, some sort of rod to punch it all the way through. I'm going to run a bit of heat over this tube as well, just to try and soften some of the grease and make it easier to hammer it through. A little bit of a tip for lighting these torches is you turn the map gas on first. So this is a map gas oxygen torch. It's a little bit hard because it's quite a windy day, but often when you turn the oxygen off, you can actually just blow the flame out. So if you turn the map gas on, light it, close the map gas until the flame comes right back and touches the nozzle, then you can start to add oxygen slowly and it should keep lit. You don't need too much oxygen for this because you don't want a really hot flame. All right, let's give it a go now. Now you can see, as per the instructions, I've gently slid the steering rod out from the tilt tube. Yeah, right. By having this out now, I've actually isolated 3 parts of the system. I can now move the outboard independently. I can now turn the helm again and see whether this cable comes in and out really freely. If it doesn't, it's either the cable or the helm. If it does, and this turns freely, it's resistance inside this tilt tube. So they're your 3 or 4 possibilities really. Your helm, your cable, the tilt tube here, or the pivot tube of the motor. Turning the helm then was nice and easy, so I don't think there's any problem with the helm itself or this cable. But I do think we have a problem with old grease in between the inner tube or the inner rod and the outer rod here, and also a problem with grease and corrosion inside this tilt tube. And that's what we're going to clean up. Grease on this inner tube can be a real problem, as well as causing resistance between the two. If you have enough old grease here, as you go and wind the helm and this cable comes in, it can actually pack up against grease here and sort of not go any further, a bit of a sort of a hydro lock sort of thing. So this needs to have a really light coating of grease, but no packed up grease behind here at all. So we'll start by cleaning this rod and then we'll move on to the tilt tube. To clean this up, I'm just going to use a rag and some carburettor cleaner because I'm just looking to dissolve this old grease. I'm hoping none of this is any serious corrosion. It certainly came off the inner rod pretty easily. The grease on this outer rod's a little bit more tenacious, so I might go and find a little wire brush or something and just see if I can get this off without scratching the stainless. What I'm finding's working the best with this one actually is just running a razor blade at a really shallow angle, the same way you might to get a sticker off glass or something like that. It doesn't leave any scratches, but it is getting this old grease off. The thing about this old grease is, as well as having no lubricating qualities, it all serves to increase the diameter of this rod, making it a tighter fit in that tube. Alright, that's the bulk of the grease off this rod now. So what I'm going to do is move on to that tube. My absolute preferred tool for those tubes are these wire spiral brushes. This one, unfortunately, which I think I showed you in the hydraulic steering video, is slightly too large for this tube and I need to order some more smaller ones. So we're going to have to make do with what we've got. First thing I'm going to do is spray some more carburettor cleaner into the tube, just try and soften that grease up. It's not a particularly aggressive first phase, but what I'm going to start with is just cutting a small piece of rag. Once I've got the little bit of rag, I'm just going to roll it up into a bit of a wad, bit of a sort of roll, soak it with carb cleaner, feed it into the tube, and then push it all the way through with the rod. It can be a pretty tight fit, so a bit of hammering to get it in. Then I'm just going to load it up. A bit more carb cleaner. And because it is a tight fit, sometimes you need to hammer this through same way as the steering cable itself. So now I'm just going to do that again, backwards and forwards a few times. Another thing you can try if you've got some really nasty sort of built up grease or corrosion is actually just a straight rod, and by angling it, you can angle it against the wall to sort of scrape along the wall of it a bit. It's a little bit aggressive, but sometimes you need to go that far. The absolute final step, if you can't get this clean, is to replace it, and it is a replaceable part. Now I've done a bit of scraping and got loads of this black. It's actually quite gritty, probably a combination of old grease and rust. Now I'm going to go back to the rag a few times just to clean that loose stuff out. I can't really get the camera in to show you how clean the tube is now, but it's a lot better than it was. The pivot tube is mild steel. I presume it has some sort of coating on it that protects it from corrosion. So once you start scouring it, presumably that coating comes off. So if yours is getting particularly bad, you might want to think about just replacing it. I'll do a video on that one day, promise. But we'll push on for now because I'm happy with how clean that is. Now I'm going to put a really light coat of this. This particular one is a white lithium grease by Worth. WD-40 also do a specialist range white lithium grease, that kind of thing. Putting a really light coating like that. I don't want a bulk of grease to be there stuck behind this rod, so very light coatings, and then the same for the outside of this tube. And that's it. You don't want bulks of even like a marine grease. You don't want slabs of that thicker style grease. A thinner, light aerosol grease like this is perfect. Now I'm going to go and wind the helm so that this cable retracts so I can fit it back in. The hardest part of getting this back in is getting the angle you need. Somebody once commented on the changing a steering cable why I was hammering it, and often it is the only way to get it in because of the angle it's at. It can be really, really tight. There's just no straight shot at it. Doesn't mean the tube's still really gummed up, just means you can't get the angle you need to slide it in. All right, it's in now. I could push it in. I wouldn't say it slid in nicely, but I think it's 100% better than when we had to hammer it out with quite a bit of force. Now I'll put it all back together and we'll see what it feels like. Before I wind this off, I'm just going to clean this thread up a little bit because it was quite corroded before, as you saw. That collar's now tightened up to the point where the actual tube's starting to spin again, so I'm pretty happy with that. All right, let's reconnect that drag link. Because this is a really critical link, I'm going to use a new stainless nylock nut as well. Because a bit of that grease now rubbed off through the tube, I'm just going to give this one last coating here. Give it a test. That's much smoother now, so I think we can call that fixed. Now the purpose of this video wasn't to kind of replicate a lot of the stuff we went through with the changing a cable video. It was more about not going and changing a cable if that's not the problem. First step to me is always just separate the outboard from the steering, see whether it's a part of the steering, then the outboard, and then once you've got the cable out, you can actually see whether it's the tilt tube we cleaned or whether it's actually the cable and the helm that's corroded up. So they're your choices. Your solutions are either simple like this, clean the grease out of the tilt tube, clean the steering rod itself, clean the pivot tube of the outboard, probably the hardest job to do out of all of these, or replace the cable or the helm if either of those are faulty. It can be a little bit harder to tell whether it's your helm that's faulty or your cable. This boat actually had that problem previously, and what you found is that the helm would move really smoothly and then all of a sudden come to a stop. And that's a situation where one of the teeth in the helm and the spiral cable was binding up. You can open the helm and have a look. Sometimes it's actually the spiral section of the cable's unraveled, sometimes it's the helm. If it turns reasonably well through its whole travel, but it's really stiff and it's not connected to the outboard, then it's likely corrosion in the steering cable itself. You can push oil right the way through the cable using compressed air, like I've done in a couple of other videos, but I found it to be a little bit less successful than it is with the control cables. If that tilt tube we looked at today was a bit beyond repair, it's also replaceable. In order to do that, you need to support the whole weight of the motor because the motor hangs off that tube. Once you take it out, nothing's holding the motor onto the boat. So it's a little bit bigger job because of that, that's all. All right, well, thanks for watching. I hope this video helps you diagnose your steering trouble if you're having it and helps you fix it if you're having this particular problem. If not, I do have those other videos that I'll put links to in the description as well. All right, well, take care, have a good day, and I'll catch you soon. See ya.